Hi, I would like to talk a little bit about Hakomi today. What is Hakomi? Hakomi. Hakomi is a way to practice therapy or deep introspection that I'm trained and certified in. And I would say it's probably one of the most powerful things I have done for myself on this journey to embodiment and awakening, because it includes everything. So let me share a little bit about what it is. We also call Hakomi a way to practice assisted self-study. That means that your therapist or practitioner or guide, whatever you want to call it, is there to help you become aware of parts of yourself that are still somewhere hidden in the unconscious and unconsciously running your life. So it's not something, you many times we can't really do it ourselves because it is so deep and we're so identified with it, and there can be so much contraction and pain around it that we have just learned to keep it in there. So one of the first principles that is really important in Hakomi is that we create a space or a container of loving presence, because all the parts that have been suppressed and held back and hidden, they're very afraid. They have had enough of being judged or shamed. And as you know, we have learned to do it to ourselves. So it really we need a space, this container of loving presence where it's going to be safe to access that unconscious, those unconscious parts of ourselves. And this time that it is done in a new way. Another part, very important part of Hakomi is mindfulness. Without mindfulness, it's going to be very hard to become aware of what is going on inside of ourselves. So mindfulness is kind of like stepping back. You take a step back from what you're identified with. You learn to take a step back, and then you can study it, like assisted self-study. So the therapist helps you study it, but you learn to study it yourself because you learn about mindfulness. If you have already learned mindfulness, and if you are already able to go inside and become aware of things, that is, of course, very helpful. If not, then, you can learn mindfulness, and that can be part of the Hakomi, where we also talk about missing experiences. And a big missing experience for most people is that we grew up not really being listened to in a way that we need to be heard or met. And because of that, we learn to turn away from ourselves instead of becoming mindful and present, lovingly present with these parts of ourselves, so they can also have a voice and they can come out. Nonviolence is another very important principle, so that when you start becoming aware of something, that it is being met with loving presence, not with violence in any way, shape, or form, not with judging, undermining, criticism. The container we create needs to be completely filled with loving presence and allowing and authenticity. It's not that we are becoming something that we're not as a practitioner, but we learn to become authentic with what's going on in a way so that it feels safe for the client to start unfolding. And there is this unfolding that happens naturally. We call it organicity. So that when things start organizing, there is just a natural flow of expression in the mind and the body connection. When we align inside and we become aware of what is going on that we were not aware of before, and then we learn to meet it in a kind, loving way, then it can start unfolding in the way it is supposed to, without all the boulders, the restrictions, the rejections. But naturally, it's like you help soften these restrictions that we have put around ourselves. And when we are able to soften them, then this natural expression that we already are, that we came here to be, now has full access to express itself and fulfill ourselves from the inside out. We won't be walking around with this something holding back where we don't believe we can have it or be it, and then we go outside and try and get it there. But we go outside from a place of lacking, and that's what we keep bringing out into the world, and that's why we keep meeting in the world what we're experiencing inside, and that we have taken on as a core belief, which is what we work with a lot, the core beliefs and the core wounds, because they're the ones that are holding us back in becoming who we truly are and are meant to be. It's like our organic self. There is a self in there that is organic, that is natural and real, that just wants to express itself. And once we get in touch with that, then we can start supporting that. And that's why talking about the missing experience, that has been a missing experience for most of us as we grew up. Just having somebody support you and kind of invite you out to find out, like, oh, this is what makes me feel alive. And oh, here it just flows naturally. And then have somebody root for you and invite you to explore that part of yourself so you can fully become that which makes you feel alive. So that's kind of the basics of that. And then there's also the principle of unity, which is also that we need to be in union with ourselves. And when we are that, we naturally become it with our surroundings. Not all at once, not everyone necessarily, but there's going to be more of a natural flow where that unity can express itself both as who we are and the surroundings, because in reality, there is no separation between us and others. But we will not know that as long as we hold ourselves back as separate, and then we meet others as separate, and then we get all the problems and the conflicts and the wars in the world. But when we know that, when we really know who we are at the core, at an organic, divine level, then there's also just a natural sense of oneness. So that's kind of a little bit about the principles of Hakomi. And then we use certain ways to help our clients become aware of their unconscious material, their unconscious core beliefs and core pains, in a way where it feels safe and where they feel okay to let it out. That's why many times when people start with the Hakomi work, there's often just an ocean of tears, many times because they finally feel heard. And that is part of the Hakomi way, to really study as a practitioner or as a therapist, to really study and feel and sense into the client. what is really going on. So inside, we can kind of get a sense of what is missing and what they need. And then we can give that to them in a way that many times surprises them. And being heard is huge in my experience with Hakomi. When people feel heard for maybe the first time, I mean, really heard at that level that we all need to be heard, then there's this contraction, that we've held ourselves back, that can suddenly relax. And that's where sometimes there's tears coming, or some memories, or some things that are all, knotted up inside. But there are many other missing experiences that can be experienced in the Hakomi work. We use something called probes, and a probe is a little sentence that we can use. Let's say I'm working with somebody and I'm getting a sense of what is going on there, and what might be a good sentence or word or expression to say while they're mindful, and then see what happens. There's never a way where the therapist is right about something. It's all little experiments, which is also a probe, is kind of one of the ways that we do little experiments with the client. And one that comes to mind right now is that was in my very early days as a Hakomi, still practicing, not certified yet. And I was seeing this client, and he had this thing where his family there was something where they were a little crazy. And he had taken that on inside. By the way he talked and what he shared, I became aware that there was a deep fear that he was crazy. So we were working, and then I can't remember what happened. There was some big thing that happened inside of him. And I said to him, "You're not crazy." And that was exactly what he needed to hear, because this whole structure of fear that he was crazy, that kind of crumbled. And it was huge. It's funny, I remember that because it's so many years ago. They're not always that huge, but that was one that was like, wow, that was just the exact right probe at the right time. And it was like the key in the door, in the lock, and it just opens up that structure. And then, of course, we work with that. That doesn't mean that it's all over and done in one session, but something cracked there. And another one is coming to mind. Somebody came in and he was sharing a lot about his life. And, there was all this, basically, he didn't say it directly, but he was trying to do everything right, and it was not appreciated, and blah, blah, blah. And then I was saying, well, let's just notice what happens when you hear me say these words. And that's how we often set it up in Hakomi. And I said, just notice what happens inside when you hear me say, "You're not doing anything wrong." And again, it's like this whole shift in his energy and in his mind, because that was the belief that he had lived under, that he's doing something wrong. So hearing somebody say that in a way that is not pushy or unkind or anything, but just as a statement for him to notice, that was another huge crack that happened. And that's actually a common one for most of us. I think we all grew up believing that there's something wrong with us, or we're doing it wrong. So these are the ways that Hakomi works, and really helping the client be able to study themselves in a loving, kind way. Not the old way where you see something in yourself and then you beat yourself up for it, it's like, oh. No, in a loving way. And that's also why I wrote my book about 15 years ago, I think, called imagine being kind to yourself, because I could just see that this was such a missing experience for most of us, to be really kind to ourselves and meet ourselves with kindness and love. So I would say, if you're curious, you're welcome to set up a free discovery session, 30-minute discovery session with me, to explore and see if this might something you want to work with. The link will be in the comments below, or the description. And what I also want to say about it, for me, the combination of Hakomi and then my spiritual practice of waking up to who I am, I think those two pieces are really, really powerful. Because if you're only in the spiritual arena to wake up, it's very, very easy to do this spiritual bypass. All this stuff that I was just mentioning for the Hakomi work. You know, there's a tendency to just bypass it and whoop, ascend. But what about all this stuff? What about it? Where's it going to go? It's still in there, and it's still impacting everything we do in our lives. So it has to be addressed, right? So having your spiritual practice here, if we can use that spiritual practice when we actually start realizing the what's it called? The illusion, or the what's it called? Where it's not permanent, the impermanence, sorry, the impermanence of the world and of ourselves. When we start realizing that it's not really real, but it seems real. So when you realize that more, then you will be able to move through this stuff that we carry, because it really doesn't have power when we just meet it. I've talked a lot about this lately, you know, just to the resistances to meet it, either to not touch it and or to just say yes to it and just kind of melt through it, right? And then we come to a oneness in a way that we can't really do without both parts of this. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that next time, about how these two pieces, Hakomi and specifically the work of Joe Goldsmith, who has been my spiritual teacher, even though I never met him live, that combination has been very, very beneficial for me. And I think I want to share a little more about that next time. Okay, my friends, thank you for listening, and until we meet again.